SourceFed Nerds Book Club. This is the show where we listen to audible.com books and then we review them.
Yeah, we talk about them here with you guys. If you don't already have Audible, you can go to audible.com/sfnerd and get a free month trial, and we'll give you a free book.
I'll throw a free book at you.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
But it's an Audible book, so it won't hurt.
That's right. It'll just hurt your ears if it's too loud. I don't know if you guys can tell by the title of the video and by the way that we're dressed right now, but we're going to be talking about the classic J.R.R. Tolkien book, The Hobbit.
The Hobbit.
So the book was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's a beloved book about heroism and coming into your own.
I love this book.
Courage and war and all that stuff.
And war!
Yeah, which is kind of a common theme in Tolkien novels,
Yes.
I believe, is the whole theme of war. And they say that this book was actually written through Tolkien's own experiences living through World War I.
World War, yeah.
This audiobook was read by Rob Inglis, who is almost like saying the word English, but without an E and without an H on it. If you haven't heard him, all you have to do is think of an old English man and you've got his voice in your head.
It's a very, well, I mean, I always hear a British accent and think regal, but it's a very authoritative and very good at voices.
Yeah, he's got a nice, I mean, look, The Hobbit, let's be honest, has like fucking 48 characters to follow. And
I wonder if he made like diagrams.
He must have.
I have to say it's very nice to listen to fantasy literature in particular, because there's so many different characters that hearing the different characters read in different voices kind of keeps everybody straight for you a little bit.
And that's the thing, there's like 75 characters in The Hobbit.
There's a lot.
He does a great job of giving them their own unique voices, which I very much appreciated, except there were some dwarves that straight up sounded like they had mental problems. He did them a little too goofy.
Were a little crazy. And for me, Bilbo sounded too old in the entire book, and it upset me a little.
Well, but I appreciated...
you said you liked that.
Well, I appreciated the youthful flair he gave it, because this is an old guy reading it, so I don't know how an old guy can really sound younger. His Gandalf is like this, and Gandalf used the Arkenstone. Well, he never used the Arkenstone, but Gandalf went into
Gandalf used the Arkenstone.
I know, what would happen? What would happen? But Gandalf, like, that's the voice, and then for Bilbo, it's like, oh, I don't know. It's kind of like a little bit of a C-3PO-ish kind of thing.
A little bit. Loved Rob. Kudos on your Gollum, though.
Yeah, the Gollum was great.
Because actually swallowing the word Gollum at the end of the sentences, like it's described in the book, was so much creepier to me, and I love it.
If you're thinking of the Hobbit movies,
that's a different thing.
It's a different thing. Like they've aged Thorin way younger in the movies. In the book, he's like super old. He's like
he's super old anyway because he's a dwarf. But continue.
So the voice for Thorin in the book is very much like an old man like this, and it's kind of like it was a little like hard to get used to because I'm so used to seeing our pretty boy Thorin in the movies.
No,
but that's Thorin. Thorin is written by Tolkien.
Dwarves are not supposed to be pretty boys.
No.
For the record.
No, for the record. No, they are not.
I think the voices that you hear it in when it's read to you just make it a much richer experience. Like, for example, Matthias Frost Henriksen said, I was young enough that the book was read to me. I remember only being able to truly connect with the characters when my dad read it because it requires a dark, solemn voice to get the right mood. And I think Rob Inglis is exactly that dark, solemn voice.
Yeah, and I think it should be said, though, that... I mean, I don't think it's debatable, but The Hobbit is definitely a young adult, almost children's book.
Well, so let's talk about that. Is it a kid's book?
I mean, pretty much. It's a children's book.
Nick Tennant says, The Hobbit is a much more lighthearted take on the Middle-earth universe. While it may seem like a fun fairy tale on top, there are underlying themes of World War metaphors and inspired characters. Tolkien further crafts the Middle-earth world through his beautiful writing style. 10 out of 10 would read again.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, you have this children's story. A lot of scary stuff happens, and I feel like writers and creators had more balls in the older days. I grew up watching movies like Return to Oz, Secret of Nim. You know, really Dark Crystal, Labyrinth. Movies that are for kids, essentially, but are terrifying and ballsy and with adult themes. And in these days, kids' movies, they really tiptoe around dark themes.
Well, I think that a great way that it kind of bridges the gap between kid and adult is that we're being told that these are Bilbo's memoirs, that like the air of whimsy, and that it's kind of being read to us by Tolkien in a way, in the way he writes it. I mean, the book ends with Bilbo writing his memoirs. Even J.R.R. Tolkien says that he is collecting what happened. He's collecting the tale of what happened and relaying it to you. And I feel like that gives enough separation as the reader that like everything's okay. It's not too real. Like, yes, you believe that this stuff actually happened, not real life. But yes, you believe this stuff actually happened as the reader without it being dangerous to you.
Because we're being told after the fact.
We're being told a story.
By someone who is alive and was involved in the story, who is obviously still alive.
I'm also saying that it gives like an extra layer of separation.
It's definitely lighter than Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
In so many ways. So many ways.
I agree. Logan Alexander says, I love the more whimsical portrayal of Middle-earth in contrast to the dark, epic scale of Lord of the Rings. It allows the book to exist in the same world but maintain its own unique identity.
Yeah, and I mean, look, very obviously, the Lord of the Rings ideas and the Lord of the Rings story and themes didn't exist when Tolkien was writing The Hobbit. In fact, I believe he even went back and edited The Hobbit in order for the ring story to be a little bit more prominent,
to have more
so that
significance.
He could, tie it into the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, I mean, when you say I appreciate the more whimsical look at Middle Earth before we go into the darker Middle Earth of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I mean, this kind of is the essential Middle Earth. This is the first Middle Earth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it is effectively before a time, before the Necromancer, before Sauron, and before the evil grew and back into what we ended up seeing in the Return of the King and
absolutely
Two Towers and Fellowship.
So yeah, the evils that we're facing in The Hobbit are a much smaller scale to what we're facing in Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And I love the humor in it. And I personally, one of the reasons that I love this book so much is because of that whimsical nature of it, because I mean, I feel like it's great for kids.
Right.
Like, this is your introduction for a lot of kids, for a lot of people, into the world of fantasy in a way that, yes, there's scary things, but they're overcome, and the little guy comes out on top, and you can do whatever you want as long as you believe in yourself.
Yeah, and it is that theme of courage, which is something we always we always look for in a hero's journey.
But
type
Bilbo
story.
doesn't always have courage.
No, but I mean, he overcomes his feelings of basically of cowardice, and that's why I love Bilbo so much, and that's why I connect to Bilbo so much.
I think every nerdy kid connects to Bilbo. He's the underdog protagonist at its finest.
Yeah, because I would much rather be in a warm near a warm fireplace reading a book or enjoying a nice pie or some kind of delicious food in my home than going out and fighting a dragon, you know, because that terrifies me.
I love the inner struggle you get in the book when he's like trying to fight between his Took side and his Baggins side. 1 second he'll be like, I can go on this adventure. Oh no, I don't want to. And you just get to see that mental struggle. And we've all been there.
Yes.
There's been some challenge in all of our lives that we've thought, I'm gonna do this. Oh no, I'm not.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you see him grow. You see him grow as a character very organically and naturally. Even by the point when they're flying on eagles, he's terrified.
Yeah.
And he's terrified of Smaug.
He's terrified.
But it's funny because you talk about the progression of character and how the courage is within you. But I've always struggled with the concept of Bilbo's courage came more from the ring than within him. Which is always something I thought about as someone who was attempting to create my own courage. I don't have a ring that could magically make me invisible when facing a dragon or when trying to sneak away from certain danger.
But do you think, say after the book's over, if he didn't have the ring, do you think he would have gained any courage?
I don't know. I mean, I think he still would have, because by the point where he discovers the ring, he does have more courage. I mean, obviously the courage.
And he doesn't use the ring. Like, I mean, he uses it the initial time to escape, but then he doesn't use it again for a little bit.
He kind of uses it a lot. He uses it with the spiders.
He uses it with the spiders. But then he has Sting.
Yeah, but I mean, he uses Sting with the ring on, I think, doesn't he?
At some points, yes. At some points,
I just feel like I've always struggled, because the concept of the story is about courage. And kind of greed too. We need to talk about the greed aspect of it.
It's about growing as a human human being.
It is, but we also have to talk about how
as a hobbit,
the whole motivation for everybody. Like we also have to talk about how the motivation for every character involves money.
It's because we're dealing with dwarves.
Right, but even
Dwarves
Gandalf is in it for the money.
Whoa, that is some racist
That's
shit.
racist. That's a little
No,
racist.
that's a characteristic of the dwarven race.
Wow.
Even Gandalf wants the money really bad. Like, you don't know Gandalf's motivation whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about The Hobbit as a standalone book, without the Lord of the Rings, without the Necromancer,
Mm-hmm.
without the ring, the One Ring of Power and Sauron, you have a man who wants money. That's why he's going on that journey in the first place.
I disagree. I don't think Bilbo's just in it for the money.
No, I'm talking about Gandalf.
Oh, you're talking about Gandalf.
Yeah, Gandalf wants money. And I think Bilbo's in it for the money.
I do not think Bilbo's in it for the money,
I mean-
because I think if Bilbo was in it for the money, he would have said yes right away. There wouldn't have been hesitation. But I think the fact that he's a Baggins. He got money.
Right, but
He's got everything he wants already. He doesn't need more money.
But the riches were part of the motivation for sure. But
because he wanted to make sure he wasn't getting dragged along for nothing.
Well, that's
he deserves
true,
his
but-
comeuppance too if he's going to go through all this danger.
I think it could definitely, I don't think it can even be argued that Bilbo's going, he has two sides. He's got that Took side, he's got that Baggins side, and he's struggling with it, and the Took side wants to see the elves, but there's that, but then there's also the money, and then there's also just kind of like the adventure.
I love that Bilbo, for a lot of the adventure, has no idea why he's going. He doesn't know why. It's an impulse. He decided to go. Now
It
he's
was an
kind of
impulse.
stuck here.
Yeah.
There's a million times throughout the book where he just wishes he was back home in the Shire and didn't make that decision.
Right, and I love that because I relate to that so many times. When I'm
ought
out on
to.
vacation sometimes when I should be having a blast, I'm thinking I'd rather be home right now because I don't want to be in this foreign part of the world called Florida that I've never
Because
been
Steve's
to.
a Baggin.
But also, it has to be said that by the end of the book, when Bilbo is going to be given his percentage of the gold and the treasures,
Yeah.
he refuses a
Right,
lot of
that's
it.
what I'm saying. I don't
And he-
think Bilbo's just
Well, I
in
think
it for the
initially
cash.
it was like the adventure and money.
I think it's 90%, I don't know why I'm going, adventure, and maybe. 10%. There's also cash.
Well, I think either way, there's definitely money was a motivator, but at the end he grows as a person. Thorin apologizes to him on his deathbed, basically, which is a big moment in the book because Thorin felt betrayed by Bilbo because of taking the Arkenstone,
Because he was so greedy.
Thorin wanted that damn Arkenstone more than anything, and it was his lifeblood and whatever. And Bilbo tried to use it as a way to stop the war from ever happening.
save people.
And Thorin says, "Fuck you! Get out of my camp! You're not a part of my company anymore."
And Bilbo loses the only friends he really had.
Yeah, and then, but it all works out in the end because the war happens and there's all this blood and death and Thorin's dying.
It all works out because there's war and
There's
blood and
war
death.
and blood and death.
Yeah.
Well, look, the stubborn people needed to see that the war was not the answer, obviously.
I want to read some of what you guys had to say regarding Bilbo's character. Joe Derry says, The Hobbit is a magnificent, brilliant story of a little hobbit facing huge obstacles.
Obstacles.
I thought this book taught me something.
Hey, Trisha.
Is that if a little hobbit can face Smaug, I can pass my final math exam. The writing is brilliant, and I love Tolkien's work. Fabulous. That's a great face. Gavin Lawley says, The Hobbit, the children's book that opened the world of fantasy to me. I was that kid in the corner reading whilst the other kids kicked a ball. I'm glad I was that kid.
Yeah, I think we were too.
Bilbo is for that kid.
Yes.
That's what this book is for.
Yes.
Tyler Yates says, a book for people of all ages, which demonstrates how important it is for us to take leaps of faith during our lives. And dwarves. Lots and lots of dwarves.
You know what? And that's a good point. I'm a very kind of reclusive guy with a lot of anxiety. I've dealt with issues of anxiety my entire life. At one point, I was almost fully agoraphobic. I wouldn't leave the house because I was
Really?
terrified of interaction, and believe it or not, as outgoing as I seem to be. You really do need to take that leap. You need to do that Bilbo move and get out of your house and get out of your comfort zone.
Do it.
You have to.
Go. I mean, you might get
Because
killed by a dragon.
You might. You can't live reclusively. You just can't. You're not living to your full potential as a human being. You're not living life to the fullest potential. They talk about exposure being the only way to get over your fears. And that's terrifying to me because it's true. There are certain fears that only exposure will take that fear away. Well, flying. I had to get into a plane and fly.
That was a big one for you.
Get over my fear of flying, and that's what exposure is. And Bilbo is essentially exposing himself to the outside world.
To things outside of the Shire.
Out of Hobbiton, out of the Shire.
He's not exposing himself like his genitals.
He's not exposing his genitals.
Maybe
maybe at one point he did, but the point is that this commenter is telling the truth. You have to take that leap of faith. You have to just step outside of that comfort zone. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a rut forever. You're not living your full potential.
That's true. James C. Nichols says, it starts well, and the riddles bit is bloody brilliant, but I had forgotten how much of a mess the ending is. And Luca Talk Reynolds says, coming strictly from the point of view of someone who watched the 2 movies, then read the book, I felt that in the book, if something was too grand for Tolkien to write, he just found a way to make us not experience it, a la End War, where they just knock Bilbo out and gave no description of the war. I felt slightly cheated. Still one of the best books I've ever read.
But I do believe that doing that is, because he's right. We've got this big buildup of the Battle of the 5 Armies coming. And you're like, oh man, this is going to be great. But again, it's a children's book. How much beheading and battle do you expect there to be?
And if we're reading it and really feeling like we are Bilbo in the story and he gets knocked out, I'm okay with not seeing what he didn't see, personally.
That's true.
I didn't feel cheated.
I didn't feel cheated either, but I do understand people that are like, going into it thinking, oh, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, these are epic, kind of violent
battles.
movies.
And this is why I'm mad about the changing of the title of the 3rd movie.
I mean, that's something to talk about too. But you're right. Getting to Bilbo getting knocked out and then missing like the whole battle basically is a bit of a cop out. But I feel like it is Bilbo's story, and I mean, it's just kind of the residual effect of being him in the book.
What's your favorite chapter, Steve?
I guess I'd have to say, I mean, Riddles in the Dark, obviously, is the go-to, because it's Gollum, and it's Bilbo. But I mean, I really do love just the beginning of the book. The beginning, the first chapter with, just learning about Bilbo, and then the dwarves all showing up. It's so magical and fun and wholesome, and just like, oh, it's so funny. The dwarves are just
Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yeah, and it's like the dwarves are like singing about destroying all of his shit, but they're not really doing it. Yeah, they're not doing it. They're just making fun of him. And then it's like Gandalf's magical, and it's such a fantastic introduction into the world.
That's what Ryan Powling says, An Unexpected Party. The chapter title is perhaps the greatest chapter I've ever read in any book. I love it to pieces, and it was done perfectly in the movie, too.
Just magical as hell.
It sets it off on a good foot.
And yours is the Riddles in the Dark?
Yeah, it always has been, because I just loved playing along to see if I could figure out the riddles, too. And those riddles are hard!
Yeah, they are.
They are difficult, especially when you're a small child. You're like, what the hell? And Bilbo's like, oh, this one's easy. It's blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really?
But I love it, Trisha, because Bilbo knowing those riddles is the equivalent of like a nerd knowing like Lord of the Rings stuff, basically.
Oh, I love it.
Like a nerd in Hobbiton, like Bilbo is just reading riddles all day probably, and just like knows riddles, and that's why his like superior like book knowledge helped him out in that scene.
Zeke Acavio says, I think Beorn was a great character that wasn't given much justice during the movie. His conversation with Gandalf and introduction to the dwarves really portrayed Tolkien's genius in creating magical and funny storytelling.
Yeah.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. When the dwarves show up to Beorn's house little by little, and Gandalf is just like, oh, I think there might be one more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it is like
hilarious.
Yeah, and that's like those parts of the books are really the kind of like, all right, you're having fun with a children's book concept.
Cheese from ear to ear.
But I
love it.
I know, it is pretty cheesy and fun, but I love Beorn. I think he's great. And also, I'm just happy he was represented in the movie at all.
Here's a great question to go off of for this. consider what's moral in the context of The Hobbit. The hero of the story is a burglar who conceals the truth from his friends, doesn't quite play fair in the riddle contest, and steals the one part of the treasure that Thorin most desires. Do the ends always or even often justify the means? Is Bilbo consistently obeying a larger and greater good? And I bring that up from Beorn because he kind of represents the good and the bad rolled up in one character. So what are we playing with here in The Hobbit?
Again, it is something to consider that The Hobbit probably wasn't written to be as in-depth as we've all been pulling it apart.
It was kid stories.
It's literally a kid's story. To say, should we really like Bilbo because he's a burglar and he steals things? But it's like, it's a fairy tale, essentially. And, you know, they're not meant to have too much more depth than what you read on the page. Bilbo might be not that great of a person. And also, it's never really understood where his burglar title is even
just
given.
Says, if I say he's a burglar, he's a burglar.
Yeah, Gandalf's just like, whatever, this guy's coming. Like, there's
it's because here, and I'm gonna be racist again. Hobbits are good at sneaking around.
Oh, here we go! Trisha, I don't know how you've gone this far. Next, you're gonna say all elves are young and beautiful, right?
Well,
Bilbo, essentially, you're right. He's burgling and he's stealing things. It can be debated that he took the Arkenstone. I think he took it knowing Thorin wanted it so bad, and it was kind of making him a little fucked up. And I think Bilbo's intentions were good when taking the Arkenstone. I'm telling you, money is a big motivator in this story. It really is.
I love that there's shades of light and dark to Bilbo and to Beorn. None of us are perfect.
Yes.
So I think it just makes Bilbo and the whole story that much more relatable.
Well, and that's true. You've got that party of dwarves. They all kind of have their own personalities, but they all seem to be their own. And they're a tight-knit group. And then you have Bilbo, the little guy. And he's just kind of like, oh, I don't really fit in.
I don't even know why I'm here.
But by the end of the book, everyone loves him and realized that he was an absolute necessary addition to the party.
Gandalf was right.
Yes.
So that about concludes this episode of SourceFedNERD Book Club. Thank you to everyone who submitted your thoughts and joined in the discussion today. My name's Trisha Hirschberger.
I'm Steve Zaragoza, and let it not be forgotten that Gandalf is just a filthy, greedy bastard who wants money.
I don't agree, for the record.
He's a filthy old man that smokes weed and wants gold. But by the Lord of the Rings, he's so much more than that. Because he's literally an angel.
Do you think he just made up all the necromancer stuff to go smoke weed?
Yes.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining in with us on the Hobbit edition of SourceFedNERD Book Club. And don't forget, if you don't already have Audible, you can go to audible.com/sfnerd, get that free month trial, get that free book, and listen to some cool stuff.
Just listen to them while you're sleeping. You learn way more while you're asleep.
Osmosis is a beautiful thing. I'm Trisha Hirschberger.
I'm Steve Zaragoza. Osmosis Jones is not a beautiful thing. That was a bad movie.
I didn't see that movie.
I know, but you remember that? You don't remember that movie? Do you even remember it? Do you have any image in your head of what Osmosis Jones is?
Should we watch it?
No.